The air in the whitewashed hall of the Garver estate didn't feel holy. It felt like a vacuum. At the center of the room stood Joseph Garver, his face contorted into a mask of pure vitriol. He didn't just look at his younger daughter, Maria. He looked through her as if her presence were a smudge on a masterpiece. "Don't waste your time on the bastard," Joseph spat, his finger jaggedly pointing toward Maria's throat. The word bastard didn't just echo, it bruised. Behind her father, Jessica stood in a blood-red gown, a vibrant, polished contrast to Maria's somber navy dress. Jessica was the promised bride, the worthy daughter, radiating a practiced, plastic grace. Maria kept her chin level, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was the family shadow, the outcast intended only for the background of the Duke's arrival. But as Duke Alaric Hawthorne stepped forward, he didn't look at the lady in red. He didn't acknowledge the father's trembling rage. His gaze locked onto Maria's steady, mournful eyes. In a movement that shattered centuries of Garver's cruel hierarchy, the Duke bypassed the pedestal and sank to one knee before the outcast. Before we continue, welcome to Brittany Stories. This is the home of powerful, emotional, and unforgettable stories, filled with drama, secrets, unexpected twists, and life-changing moments. Each story is crafted to entertain, inspire, and keep you thinking long after the video ends. If you love shocking reveals, hidden identities, billionaire secrets, and stories that touch the heart, you're in the right place. Like our videos, if they move you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. The Duke remained on one knee, a mountain of dark wool and steel-eyed intent. The silence in the hall was no longer empty. It was heavy with Joseph Garver's suffocating ego. To Joseph, Maria was not a daughter. She was a mistake written in flesh, a bastard born of a lapse in judgment he had spent 20 years trying to erase. Maria looked down at Alaric Hawthorne. Up close, he didn't look like the cold predator the rumors suggested. He looked like a man who had finally found the missing piece of a puzzle. Jessica, standing just inches away, let out a sharp, choked breath. Her hand, which had been poised to accept a proposal, now fluttered uselessly at her side. For Maria, the world had always been a series of small rooms and hushed insults. She had learned to make her footsteps silent and her presence negligible. But under the Duke's unwavering gaze, her invisibility felt like it was burning away. The shadows she had hidden and were receding, forced back by the sheer gravity of a man who saw a queen where her father saw a stain. Alaric Hawthorne loathed the theater of the nobility. He had spent weeks visiting the great houses of the North, weary of the way fathers paraded their daughters like prized livestock. He had seen enough rehearsed perfection to last a lifetime. When he entered the Garver estate, he had expected the same. He saw the red-clad Jessica, a woman who had been sculpted for his approval. But then, he heard the snarl. He saw Joseph Garver point a shaking finger at the girl in the navy dress, dismissing her with a word designed to kill a soul. It was Maria's reaction that stopped his heart. She didn't weep. She didn't beg. She stood with a spine of iron and eyes that held the depth of a midnight sea. While the rest of the room clamored for his attention, Maria offered him the only thing he actually wanted, the truth. In that moment, Alaric knew he wasn't looking for a social alliance. He was looking for the strength he saw reflected in the outcast's quiet defiance. "Get up, Your Grace." Joseph's voice cracked, the sound of a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse. He stepped forward, his face flushed a sickly purple. "The girl is nothing. A lapse in judgment. Jessica is the one you came for. She is the Garver legacy." Jessica's face was a mask of crumbling porcelain. "Father is right," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and fury. "She doesn't even have a dowry, Alaric. She has nothing to offer you but her shame." The Duke finally rose, but he did not release Maria's hand. He turned his head just enough to fix Joseph with a look that made the older man recoil. "You speak of shame, Garver, yet you're the only one in this room who should feel it." He turned back to Maria, ignoring the frantic whispers of the servants. The decree had been made, but not the one Joseph had planned. The negotiation was over before it had even begun, and for the first time in her life, Maria Garver was the only person in the room who truly mattered. The walk to the carriage felt like a fever dream. Joseph's shouting faded into the stone walls, replaced by the rhythmic click of Maria's simple shoes on the gravel. She was an uninvited witness to her own escape. As Alaric guided her toward the hawthorn crest, Maria caught a glimpse of her father in the tall window. He was still pointing, still mouthing the word bastard to the empty air, his power evaporating with every step she took. Beside her, Alaric was a silent pillar of strength. He didn't rush her. He seemed to understand that Maria was shedding 20 years of skin. "They will say I stole you," he said softly as he handed her into the velvet-lined carriage. Maria looked back at the house that had been her prison. "They will say you took a shadow," she replied, her voice finally finding its edge. Alaric shook his head, his hand lingering on the carriage door. "No, Maria, I took the light. The rest of them can have." News of the Duke's scandalous choice traveled faster than the carriage. By the time they reached the neutral grounds of the Hawthorne Winter Estate, Joseph Garver had already sent a frantic courier. The letter was a final, desperate sales pitch. "Take Jessica, and I will double the land. The other one is flawed, a gutter-born distraction." Alaric read the letter in the library, the firelight dancing in his eyes. He didn't hide it from Maria. He laid it on the mahogany table between them, exposing her father's cruelty in the harsh light of day. "He thinks you are a commodity to be traded or discarded," Alaric said, his voice a low growl of indignation. Maria stared at the ink. For years, these words would have broken her. But standing in this room, surrounded by Alaric's books and the smell of old parchment, she realized the flaws her father listed were the very things that made her real. She looked up at the Duke. "He is selling a ghost," she said, referring to the sister who lived only for praise. "But I'm finally standing here." Alaric smiled, a rare, genuine expression. "And here's exactly where you belong." The official betrothal dinner was not a quiet affair. Alaric had invited the neighboring lords, a move Maria feared would end in her public humiliation. When they entered the ballroom, the whispers were like 1,000 stinging insects. "The outcast," they hissed. "The bastard bride." But Alaric was prepared. In the center of the room, before the highest-ranking nobles in the land, he didn't just announce the union. He repeated the gesture that had broken her father's heart. He didn't stand above her as a savior. He knelt before her as a partner. "I do not choose a name." Alaric's voice rang out, silencing the room. "I choose the woman who kept her soul intact while a house tried to crush it." The room went dead silent. The power shifted. Maria didn't look at the shocked faces of the elite. She looked down at the man at her feet and realized that her outcast status had never been a curse. It had been the forge that made her strong enough to stand beside a duke without flinching. 3 days later, Jessica arrived at the gates, her perfect facade finally shattered. Her red gown was wrinkled, her hair escaping its pins. She didn't come to apologize. She came to demand. "You've ruined everything," she screamed at Maria in the garden. "The Duke was my destiny. You were supposed to stay in the corner where you belong." Maria looked at her sister and felt a strange, cooling wave of pity. Jessica was still performing, still believing that life was a script written by their father. "The corner was the only place where I could see the truth, Jessica," Maria said calmly. "You were so busy looking at the Duke's title that you never bothered to look at the man." Jessica's face contorted, a mirror of their father's rage. But the venom didn't sting anymore. Maria realized that Jessica's beauty was a cage, and her own shame had been her key to freedom. When Alaric appeared at the end of the path, Jessica instinctively straightened her dress, posing for him. He didn't even blink. He walked straight to Maria, ignoring the cracked porcelain of the elder sister for the enduring strength of the younger. The garden became their sanctuary. Away from the politics and the letters from her father, Alaric and Maria spoke of things the Garver estate had never allowed: philosophy, the future, and the burden of expectations. Alaric confessed that his Duke persona was as much a mask as Maria's Outcast label had been. "I'm expected to be a statue," he admitted, watching the sunset. "But I wanted someone who knew what it was to be human." Maria reached out, her fingers brushing the stone of the bench. "I spent my life being told I was less than human," she whispered. "A stain on a family tree." Alaric took her hand, his thumb tracing the line of her palm. "A stain is just something that breaks a boring pattern, Maria. You're the only interesting thing that has happened to this lineage in 100 years." They found common ground in their shared scars. He wasn't her knight in shining armor. He was a man who had been lonely in a crowd, finding a woman who had been lonely in a corner. Together, the garden didn't feel like a hiding place. It felt like a beginning. The final transformation was not one of clothes or jewelry, though Maria now wore the hawthorn emeralds with a quiet grace. The real change was in her eyes. When the time came for the final wedding documents to be signed, Joseph Garver was forced to attend. He stood in the back, his finger no longer pointing, but trembling with a different kind of fear. He was now the outcast in a world that valued his daughter. Maria signed her name, not as a bastard, but as a woman. She looked at her father one last time, not with hatred, but with a terrifyingly calm indifference. He had no power here. The worthless daughter had become the pillar of the most powerful house in the north. As she walked down the aisle toward Alaric, the outcast shadow was gone. In its place was a visible soul, radiant and unyielding. She hadn't been rescued from her life. She had been recognized for the person she had been all along. The Duke met her halfway, taking her hand as an equal. They didn't just walk toward a throne. They walked toward a life where sincerity was the only currency that mattered. Thank you for watching Brittany's Stories. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful stories you won't forget. And please leave a comment. I would love to hear from you.